All right. Thank you, Scott. Good evening, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be here. I've been irregular the last couple of weeks, but I'm feeling better and I'm happy to be back. Um, it's halfway through December almost, and every time this time of year we visit in some form or another, just talking about the holidays, because over the years of my own recovery and working with recovering addicts, the holidays present really a bunch of challenges that can really make life difficult for us. And I think it's just good to move into the season with our eyes open and just to be reminded of some basic stuff. And these are things I think that we practice in our year-round lives, but I think sometimes this time of year we can get distracted and we lose balance a little bit. So I just had 5 points I want to kind of talk about, and then we'll go forward. But I think the key, and we always talk about the importance of connection, and we know in addiction research that's becoming increasingly significant. The level of robustness, if you will, of our social networks. How connected are we with other people? And I think in the holiday season, we have the tendency sometimes to let go of our priorities and kind of let go of our social networks and move into other things, other tasks, other obligations. So just the very first and simple and probably most powerful tip tonight is to really consciously, with intention, remain connected to your support system, your circle of friends. It's worth the time to send a text, to make a call, to touch base with them, because this is not just a difficult time of year for you, it's a difficult time of year for everybody. And I think after the pandemic, people are still kind of reeling a little bit. We're trying to figure out how to get life back to normal, and it's a hard thing. So that support system is really important. And I encourage you, there's that old AA expression, one phone call saves 2 lives. I think it's a great notion, and that sometimes if I'm having a struggling day, I may feel reluctant to reach out and call a friend because I don't want to burden that person with my problems. But in reality, making that call really helps both of us. And I've been on the receiving end of those calls, and I never feel like it's a burden. I always feel like it's a gift in many ways, because I can share, I can relate, and I also get the benefit of that connection. So make sure you kind of reach out. The other thing too, when people will contact you, you may not have a solution, and that's okay. We don't have to solve everybody's problems. Most times, in my experience, people just want to be listened to. They want to be witnessed. They want to just have that connection, and they don't expect you to fix it. So I think that's really important too. I think sometimes we put an extra layer of burden on ourselves, thinking, oh my God, I have to have a solution to this really hard, intractable problem. And we don't necessarily have to, but just the point of being heard itself is therapeutic. So that social connection piece. The second one, to really, and this is also really important, I think, for the holidays, to really manage our expectations, to think about, okay, what is it? What are my specific plans? Where am I going to be when? With whom? What am I going to be doing? Because I think a lot of us avoid finalizing, avoid making plans, avoid just kind of making arrangements until the last minute, and then we're scrambling, and then we may end up not being invited to any place, or get kind of caught out in the middle. And so it's really just important to just think about it and plan. And then I remember my first sponsor once helped me greatly by saying, there's a difference between obsessing about something and planning for something, right? We can worry about the future with no real outcome, or we can dip into the future and plan and make a plan and live with that. So I think be aware of past holidays. What are the pitfalls? Is a family get together at your house not such a great idea? Are there certain relatives you just don't want to be bothered with this year? Are there certain things you need to do to protect yourself? Are there relatives that drink too much, that get sloppy, and that can be triggering? So those kind of things, just to have I guess you call it situational awareness of what's going on around you, in order to kind of avoid those special pitfalls. That relates to the third one, which is just trying to stay balanced. Balance in my own recovery has been a real challenge, just because I get over enthusiastic about stuff, and I kind of dive in and at the expense of other things in other areas of my lives. In the holidays, I think maintaining that balance. What do I mean by that? I mean, avoid overindulging in food, overindulging in drink if you drink, overindulging in drugs if you drug, overindulging in spending. I think sometimes we just go wild and throw kind of limits to the wind, and we sort of want to express our love and our affection for people, and we buy things and we overindulge and we overcommit our time. We don't give ourselves breaks or nap time on certain days. So think, just be aware of that. Be aware of not having to do everything for everybody to stay in balance and what that means for you. And I think each of us have our own unique set of factors of what being in balance even means. But I think for me, it means taking time, a little bit of time every day for myself. It means getting plenty of sleep. It means making sure I'm eating well, taking the time to eat well and take care of myself and work my program. Sometimes I think we'll just kind of let our routines slide till after the holidays. And boy, that's a better way, I think, that we can get in trouble. So again, a little bit of planning. What situations might throw you off balance? Where are you vulnerable to kind of falling into those pitfalls? And then two more related. The fourth one would be just managing your attitudes about stuff. So be aware of your own patterns from the past. What have the holidays been like for you? How have you coped with it? What have you done well? What have you not done so well? And then really start to fight the old negative stuff that starts to bubble up inside our heads about the holidays. We may have critical self-talk. We may have those negative voices in our heads that undermine, and really to use the tools that we should be using year-round, but to look at positive affirmations, to look at correcting negative thoughts, to kind of clean up our internal processes so that we don't have a little bit of self-sabotage going on inside our own heads. One way I found to do this attitude correction, if you will, or maintenance, is gratitude. And we've talked about gratitude this year many times, but gratitude, I think, is an incredibly powerful tool that can, for me at least, brings me back in balance. It kind of corrects a lot of the negative attitudes because it makes me focus on positive things, on things that I do have in my life and things that I'm grateful for in so many different ways. So these are kind of the corrective mechanisms, I think, like a gratitude list that can get you back on track. And then finally, and this is an obvious one, but I think, we as addicts can sometimes get a little self-centered and we can sort of get all wrapped up in us and the holidays. And I think that's a bad place to be. I remember my first sponsor is saying, the space between your ears is a dangerous neighborhood. Don't go there by yourself. And I think that's true. We can kind of get wrapped up in our own stuff. So the antidote for me, and that one, is to move out of myself. Go, what can I do for service? How can I be helpful to somebody else? How can I volunteer somewhere? And just, it gets me out of my own stuff, out of my own problems, because we can get very much too wrapped up in ourselves. So really trying to refocus on what the holiday spirit is all about, to take time to volunteer, to do something for somebody else, to reach out, to sponsor, disadvantaged families at Christmas dinner, whatever it takes. There's a wonderful kinds of things and many opportunities of agencies, especially right now, because people are still struggling, that are trying to do good work. And I think all of us can really make a powerful contribution. And I can't think of any better gift, not only for the people we're helping, but for myself, than to kind of drop into that attitude of service for the holidays. So just some thoughts on the approaching season. I wish everybody a wonderful holiday as it comes, but I think we just have to go in with our eyes open. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Welcome, everybody. Please type your questions, anything on this topic or anything to do with addiction, recovery, healing, betrayal, all that stuff. Let's see, we just got one come in. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on gratitude, if that's okay, David.
Of course.
Most of you have probably heard of Brene Brown. If you've been in one of the online work groups with me, or you're a treatment center alumni and you've dealt with me, which you would be you would have dealt with me if you're a treatment center alum a little bit, not as much as David, but you know my spiel on gratitude. But it starts with Brene Brown. Brene Brown, most of you have heard of her. She's written a gazillion books. She's got some great TED Talks. She kind of got famous. Her initial study was on why people are happy, why some people are happy and some people aren't happy. And she was curious. She wanted to know. And we could all look around and go, oh, that person's generally smiling and happy, and that one's generally a grump. And, we fall into one of the two camps. And she wanted to know what's going on here, why. So she and a bunch of grad students put together a list of, I think it was over 300 questions. I mean, it was everything they could think of. And they interviewed over 10,000 people. And at the end of this study, they found one difference between happy people and unhappy people. And that difference is happy people are grateful for what they have. Doesn't matter what they have, doesn't matter what they don't have. They're grateful for what they have. And I mean, that to me is an absolute revelation. If I want to be happy, I just need to do a gratitude list every day. Pause, take some time and do a gratitude list. Further research finds that people who do gratitude lists, people who are grateful for what they have, they live longer, they're healthier overall, they're happier, they're more successful, they have better relationships, they make more money, they're more likely to recover from a head cold. I mean, anything you can think of, people who are grateful do better. So during the holiday seasons, when we are stressed, and this is what David was talking about, I find a gratitude list. I do it year round, and I recommend that to everybody. I do it every morning before I get out of bed, a 10-item gratitude list. During stressful seasons like the holidays, sometimes I'll do it more than once in a day, and sometimes I'll do it around a specific event or a specific something that's going on. This is kind of an annual thing. I host basically a Christmas open house, and I'll have anywhere from 50 to 100 people show up. Mostly people in recovery, but not all of them. Friends of friends, acquaintances from recovery, just, I don't want anybody to be alone at Christmas, and they bring a potluck, so I don't have to cook all of it. But I have done a couple gratitude lists around that, because it's stressful to like prep the house and, do something, and my mother's going to be here at the same time. Do a gratitude list around that one too, but it will change almost any bad mood. A bad mood cannot survive a 10-item gratitude list. It just can't. So,
Sure.
So, all right. You want to jump into the Q&A, shall we?
Yes, that sounds great. Perfect.
Okay. First one here. Do you have any suggestions for bringing the magic back when historically the holidays were ruined by family of origin drama, negative memories, etc.? Great on-topic question here.
Great question. Yeah. Scott, did you want to say some more?
No. I was just going to reiterate it, but I think everybody got it.
Okay. Yeah. I think what a brilliant question, because it's something I think most of us can relate to, right? In some level or another, with that kind of historical drama that a lot of us have. And in many ways, for me, for a while, the holidays were kind of tainted. I really worked hard to kind of do an attitude adjustment on that and kind of redefine the holidays. What I found was bogging me down or bringing me down is if I was comparing this ideal version of the holidays that was kind of this mix of sappy commercials and old TV movies and Christmas cards and advertisements and this kind of romantic idealized version that I don't think anybody really has, but it certainly wasn't the Christmas that we had when I was a kid. But I had to kind of really let go of that idealized version. And part of it to do with Scott was just saying about gratitude. What do I have in my life? Who's in my life? And how can I make this year's celebration something that reflects where I'm at this year, and not necessarily trying to recreate negative energy or bad situations from my past. There's a technique we've talked about here before, I think, that's been useful for me in this regard, and that's beginner's mind, right? And that's the notion of having no preconceived notions, having no expectations, but just really having kind of good wishes and goodwill, and also a little bit of careful selecting, right? In order to kind of keep any holiday things I do from degenerating into that kind of old stuff that I had as a kid, I'm very careful. I'm very careful about who I invite, who's there, what the parameters are of my own boundaries. So I think there's ways we can protect ourselves in the midst of a season that often feels out of control, but by having boundaries and by carefully selecting who we let in, who we surround ourselves with, and kind of really redefining those expectations. I talked about managing expectations. I think that's just it. What do we do? What do we want? What would make a great Christmas? That's a great inventory, like, or a great holiday. It doesn't have to be Christmas, but what would make a great holiday? And to me, it comes down to connection, gratitude, a sense of being among people that get me and who I get, and that kind of stuff. So I think it's been a matter of redefining what the holiday means, as opposed to this gathering of people in their various forms of addiction that I grew up with. Scott, what do you think about that?
I think you're right on target. What I would add to it is acceptance. There's that passage in the AA Big Book, which sometimes I'll look it up and read it to people. I'm not going to do it today because I've done it like 4 times this week already. Because the holidays for me are all about acceptance. Because people, we love them, but they often behave badly or in ways that seem annoying to us. And that's okay. That's who they are. This is, I always look at it as my gift to them is not getting angry when they, my mother came out. The last time she was here, we had to buy new wash racks because she didn't like, showering with the wash racks I had. And we also had to buy new baking sheets because she didn't want to make cookies on the baking sheets I had for some reason. Okay, my gift to her is to say, all right, let's go down to Home Goods and do a little shopping. And we did. And I just let it go. It was annoying. And it's the kind of thing she always does. She has to control something, even if it's not her house. And that's always been her MO at the holidays. Control, control, control. She tries to create Norman Rockwell paintings. That doesn't happen in real life. So yeah, a lot of what David said, like managing expectations for me, I don't expect things to go off perfectly. And then when they don't, I don't care. It's not a big deal. But I have to accept that people are, they're going to bring their dogs to my holiday party and one of them's going to pee in the house and, and that it's gonna happen. It's like, okie doke, fine. So yeah.
Scott, and that what you said just ties in so perfectly with what you said earlier about acceptance, right? It's a matter of letting go of these expectations and control and just accepting what it is, and without being out of shape about stuff. And
yeah, totally. And this is also a being of service thing. Yes, my friends will all be here, but there's going to be people here I don't know. They're just in recovery and they didn't have anything else to do, and somebody, they hurt, and that's great. It's also being of service, and I think that's very important. When I was in early recovery, I did not have a lot of friends, and I was very far away from my family. These events were important to me, so now it's time to give back. Anyway, this is how I get through the holidays. But basically, everything, the 5 things that David suggested earlier, I do them all one way or another. So yeah. Besides watching older webinars and focusing on solo therapy work, are there any other things you'd recommend for the holidays when many of the webinar and other therapy groups are canceled? So how do you fill in? Because yeah, I think on Christmas Day and Christmas Eve and same for New Year's Day and New Year's Eve, we're canceling our freebies for that day. What other things could people do?
Right. I think, well, again, a good question, because it's planning in advance. What can I do to fill in those gaps? I would suggest if you can find something in real life that would be helpful, and that might be something service oriented, as I mentioned earlier. Depending on where you live, like I live in an area that on the holidays, we have several recovery clubhouses that have basically 24/7 meeting marathons. And so you can, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I can go to a meeting on those holidays. So that may or may not be available to you, but that's always kind of my backup plan. I can always do that, right? If everything else follows through. But I think to make an effort, and it's true, there's certain things, schedules are going to be disrupted. I think just to really double down on trying to connect with people and stay connected. And part of that may be just you reaching out to people to say hi and say hello, not so much for you to get something, although you will, but to really be of service to them. So I would just look for opportunities for service, for volunteer, to be connected. I think also, to me, it's important during the holidays to move out of the virtual world. I'm not there all the time, but to have some real world connections, some laughs, some interactions, because I think those kind of real time, real world things are incredibly important. So I think, yeah, just kind of start scouting things out now. I think you might be surprised that there's more things to do than you might have thought. But it's a good awareness to have, and start looking around and seeing what's out there for sure.
Muted. I would add to that bookending. It's a basic sobriety tool. I know I've got the family event from 9 to midnight on whatever night, and I know my mother-in-law is going to be there and drive me nuts. So I reach out to my sponsor before, and we have a quick conversation. This is the event I'm going to. These are the people that are going to be there. We create a plan for me to stay sober, or at least not to bite anyone's head off, which to be a person in recovery. And then we connect after the meeting, even if it's just a quick text to say, hey, I did okay, or can we talk in the morning or whatever. It helps us plan, which David mentioned earlier, and it also helps us become accountable. Like, I am going to go to this event and not get angry with anyone. And then I have to check in with David tomorrow and say, yeah, I didn't get angry with anyone, or I did. Here's what I might need to do differently next time. So that's a good tool for some of this stuff, just particularly for specific events that might be difficult.
Great.
Hello, I am a porn addict, sex addict in recovery for almost 4 years, support groups, workshops, etc. My betrayed spouse does not have a therapist or support group and has not shared about this with anyone. She doesn't want to consider doing that either. We were at a good place and had recently started IVF, in vitro fertilization, due to fertility issues for both of us. Then I had a slip and she got triggered even worse than our D-Day. It was a roller coaster of emotions over little things. She even went ahead and disclosed my behavior to one of our common friends to get back at me. I am trying to best support her, but it just does not make sense. And I wonder if I'm missing something here. Can you suggest any tips on what I can do more in a situation like this, where my betrayed partner's anger just takes over and we can't even have a conversation?
Right. Yeah, that's a really tough situation, and it's not an unusual one. The whole phenomena of betrayed partners and what they go through leads to this very you can almost say hypersensitivity to things around them, and reactivity to that. And it's totally understandable, and it makes sense in the context of what they've been through. I guess where I have some concern is that if your wife hasn't really sought to create her own support networks with a therapist, with recovery groups and so on, because I think sometimes we just can't do this by ourselves. We need that support. And, sex and porn addiction particularly have a lot of shame around them for everybody. And I think there's people have a tendency, at least initially, to not want to talk about it, to kind of go underground and just, ignore it, if you will. That's not a good strategy for recovery, for moving forward, for healing, because things just remain unstated. Things remain kind of around the edges and not acknowledged. And so I think whatever you could do, and by the way, after the events you described, you may not be in a position to offer any advice for her, where she's not going to be receptive to it. But my hope for her, however that happens, would be that she gets some support for herself and get some perspective, and help her develop the tools to deal with whatever she needs to deal with to help her move out of this discomfort, because it can't be an easy thing for her, obviously. Nor is it, and is it for you, I'm sure, because things get a little out of kilter when one person is working a program of recovery and their partner is not. So I guess the main bottom line for me would be to have her get into some support systems, CSAT, recovery groups, webinars like this, whatever she could do that she might find helpful. The other thing, from your point of view, I think sometimes we hit points in relationships in recovery like this where things get really strained. There's been a tipping point, there's been a little acting out, there's been some reaction. And so suddenly there's kind of more stuff to clean up as a result of this. And I think sometimes when a couple is engaged in that really close and reactive kind of mode, it's really hard to have any kind of productive conversation flow from that. So one of the things we recommend early on to our clients in seeking integrity is that and this is a kind of a theoretical model, if you will, but for the addict and the partner both to be doing work on themselves individually before they start trying to connect and heal the relationship a few months down the road with disclosure or couples work or whatever. And that allows each one to do their work. If you try to engage too soon with that, people just start to react because there's usually years-long patterns of triggering each other. And so, you're probably not the best messenger in this thing. But if you could maybe be supportive of her, getting whatever support she can and encourage her to find that voice. I think what I would recommend for you is, especially with this recent relapse, I would really, double down on your program, do the work you need to do, talk about the situation with your support, with your therapist, and maybe get some tips. One thing that might break the ice down the road, if she's amenable, would be to invite her to one of your therapy sessions. I've done that periodically to just kind of break the ice, to have a kind of a third person monitor some conversation just to get some dialogue going. But the danger, as I said, with that, if it's too soon, you're going to just trigger each other and it could all blow up. So you got to be really careful about the timing. But I think if anything, you're not the right messenger, but you speaking your concerns in the context of the therapy session with somebody else kind of being a coach or monitor, like a therapist, it could be really helpful. So that would be one alternative that I would also suggest.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times betrayed partners will say things like, well, why do I have to go get therapy? I'm not the one with the problem. And the answer is, you don't have to go get therapy. You deserve to get some therapy. You could probably you might appreciate some actual support and having somebody on your side. And that makes a little more sense to them. David, can you talk a little bit about how sweeping it under the rug doesn't help? I mean, trauma that is acknowledged and dealt with versus trauma that is ignored.
Right. And, and this is I think an impulse that we have often, not only because of the shame of all this, but because of these are deep emotional issues. There's a lot of pain and basically addicts, certainly. And I think a lot of partners also are kind of avoiders of these things, right? We don't want to talk about it. We don't really want to feel it. We just kind of want to move on. And I've seen this. It's not that unusual in recovery for people just like, why do a disclosure? Let's just, just either it'll work or it won't. Let's just move on and go forward. The problem, and this is the whole point of a disclosure, by the way, is to get everything out on the table and kind of have a fresh start that everybody can believe in and have faith in when we don't talk about stuff. And this came up this past week on the unit in a group I was doing where people were talking about secrets. Guys coming in treatment having secrets, and probably every client we've ever had comes in saying, I have something or several things I'm going to take to my grave. Nobody's ever going to talk. It's just there's too much shame around it or too much hurt, but I can't. It wouldn't do no good to share it. And I can understand that on the surface, but the important part about those things is that if you don't share that, if those things remain kind of locked up and buried, they're going to cause trouble. You're going to know they're there. Other people can feel they're there. There's stuff there that can bubble up and will undermine the whole foundation of your recovery. So it seems almost counterintuitive sometimes, like, why do I have to talk about everything? But we really encourage people to lay it all out, drop the shame, drop the secrets. These are burdens that people don't need to carry around anymore. And if you don't, you pay a price, because it really does. It like creates flaws in the foundation of your recovery that will create a weakness at some point down the road. They just always do.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Next one here. My wife is coming at me really angrily, throwing things, shouting, and saying things that feel degrading and insulting. This is new. She has never been like this. She's been sad and frustrated, but never outright angry like this. In the moment, I feel like stopping the situation and leaving, telling her we can talk about it when she calms down. However, she sees this as me not wanting to join her in her pain. I'm trying to sit through these episodes and take it. Is it therapeutic for her? And I'm going to add, is it wise for me to sit there in a situation that feels degrading and insulting?
Yeah, tough situation. You know, addicts do some pretty terrible things, and these are things that we have to take responsibility for and clean it up. However, I think every person, addict or not, deserves respectful communication and a way that we can express feelings and safety, right? This is not safe. And I'm sure, I know your wife is in a very reactive mode. She's, I'm sure, in a lot of emotional pain. But this is I think, kind of a dangerous escalation, because when people go down this road of just kind of yelling and you know, it's abuse, frankly. It's not productive. It honestly is not benefiting her either. People, when they're in this mode, are just kind of reacting. They're not, there's no relief from the outburst. Typically, there may be a momentary flood of endorphins, but it doesn't solve anything. It just kind of makes it worse. So again, as in a previous question, I really hope she can get some support for herself. This is a really kind of a tricky escalation if she hasn't done these kind of things before. So really something is not right. Something needs some attention. And so hopefully she'll be able to go to CSAT or a therapist or somebody who can support her in this. The bottom line, it's not healthy for her, and it's not healthy for you. You know, if we're going to have a chance at healing a relationship as a couple, we need to be able to have some ground rules about how we engage. And in the beginning, I often find it beneficial to even talk about a therapeutic separation for the reasons I mentioned a few minutes ago. People are so caught up and reactive, they can't engage without falling into these old patterns. And so sometimes some distance and a few weeks or months with some therapeutic goals around them can really help break that pattern. And so when people do re-engage together, they can talk to each other without at least being so automatically triggered. The one thing I would suggest, again, as in a previous question, is maybe figure out if you can engage a couple sessions somehow with a therapist to work this through, because I think you too on your own can't really break this cycle. In my experience, anyway, she's going to react. You're going to stuff feelings, you got hurt, or react yourself, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It's not good. You deserve to have respectful conversation, as does she. And so I think just to really pay attention to the dynamics here. And in my experience, once you hit this level of reactivity, you really need some outside assistance in breaking the pattern. And that would be a therapist or somebody that could really help, because I don't see you guys kind of working your way out of this on your own.
Yeah, I just I popped a link into the chat feature. We have a respectful conflict agreement posted on our website, so I popped the link up for that. That can be really helpful a lot of the times. Next question here: is it unrealistic for me to expect my husband to stop objectifying, sexualizing, and flirting with young women? I find it hurtful and it makes me anxious, as I see this as part of his addiction. He says it is ingrained and unconscious and will always be a part of him, and that he's been an addict for over 40 years. He says his sobriety is measured only by, is he watching porn or having sex with others? Thoughts, David?
Yeah, a lot of them, actually. I think, you know, it's not unusual. We see addicts often kind of drawing boundary lines around certain behaviors of, this is my addiction, I'll deal with this. This other stuff is kind of just the way I am. It's every man is this way, you know, whatever we tell ourselves. The bottom line here is that kind of fantasy-based, sometimes obsessive thinking is absolutely part of the sex addiction. It goes hand in hand with the acting out. If we look at the addiction cycle, that preoccupation phase is all about fantasy. It's kind of what you're describing here, that he's in this kind of constant state. When people are doing that, they're getting little dopamine hits. They may not even realize it, but they're very much in their disease. And so I would suggest somehow helping him understand, and it may be his therapist that has to do this, that expand the notion of what recovery means. When we're in fantasy, we are on the slippery slope to relapse. And by the way, there's a lot of techniques that are really important that I think actually the sex addiction programs do really well, far better than the drug addiction programs, in terms of how to manage fantasy, because they recognize it as a problem. And this is a problem. And so things like, the 3-second rule, for example, we talk about how people, it's true that if we see an attractive person on the street, we're going to notice that's an attractive person. And that's I think the extent of how our hard wiring plays a role. At that point, we as recovering addicts are responsible for, okay, what's next? Do I take this notion of this attractive person on the street and really run with it? Do I engage in it? Do I fantasize about it? Do I go down that rabbit hole? Or do I do that 3-second rule thing where I remind myself this is a person, this is somebody's daughter or mother or sister, and just kind of rehumanize them and de-objectify them. So my opinion, this is absolutely a problem. And I think he needs to really address it. I'm sure it's been a lifelong issue. It is for a lot of sex addicts, but it's something we have to learn how to change. And otherwise it's just going to get him in trouble. And of course, and thank you for verbalizing so beautifully, the impact on you. If you're trying to build a relationship with integrity and intimacy with somebody and they're, distracted all the time or in fantasy about somebody else all the time, that's not only hurtful, it's just destructive to the relationship. So, you have every right to be concerned, in my opinion, and hopefully you can kind of see the light. There are tools, even something like our work groups, that might be really useful with some practical ways to deal with these things, because these are not unique issues. These are issues that we deal with all the time. So hopefully you can get some insight on that. Scott, you probably deal with this a lot more than I do, actually. Any feedback?
Constantly. I actually popped the link to the online work group for sex addicts because I always have to deal with this. Well, I'm just being nice. No, you're flirting. No, I'm just being nice. Would your wife say you're being nice, or would she say you're flirting? Well, she would say I'm flirting, but I'm like, there is no but.
You're only nice to women.
Yeah, and when the male waiter comes over, you just place your order. It's the female waitress that comes over. Yeah, and saying, I only measure my sobriety by whether I'm not watching porn and not having actual sex with other people. Really, that's part of your denial. I mean, there is a whole lot more to this addiction. And, actual sex, I go back to Bill Clinton. I did not have sex with that woman. Bill, you did. I mean, you don't have to have vaginal intercourse for it to be sexual or for it to be cheating, or for it to be part of your addiction. So yeah, we deal with this. We deal with it at inpatient treatment all the time. And we definitely deal with it in the online work groups. One of the major tasks when somebody starts recovery with us, or really anybody who treats addiction, is breaking through this kind of denial. Like, this behavior is okay. No, it's not. Your wife is not okay with it. Therefore, it is not okay. You're married. So yeah, I can rant on that for a while. So anyway, my sex addict husband of over 40 years keeps disappointing me. He keeps looking for reasons to blame me because our marriage is not healing. He also does not see that he has to do work to heal. He is only on step 3. This is of the 12 steps. And this is 3 years since recovery. He's only up to step 3. I have worked in therapy and groups, etc. Why now is he looking for excuses to blame me when after discovery, like immediately after discovery, he didn't do that? Is this a common pattern in poor recovery? Interesting question.
Yeah, let me start with the last part first. I think it's a very common pattern in different stages of recovery. It can be early on, it can be later. But when we see people, and really an essential feature of recovery for the addict is taking responsibility for what they've done, for their behavior, for their ongoing behavior, for their following through on their word and their integrity and all that. Really important concepts. And when we see blaming, what I read that as is just, I'm not taking responsibility for this. It's not my issue, it's yours, it's somebody else's, it's nothing to do with me, right? And we see, and this can range, I don't know what the blaming is like, but I've seen really just cruel examples, with talking about weight or other kinds of issues that, I'm not attracted to anymore, that just putting all the blame on the partner, which is just incredibly unfair and hurtful, of course. So I think, yeah, the blaming thing is a big red flag in my mind that this is going on. Also, I think it's interesting the timing here, because he's been hanging around program a lot. I'm not sure how much recovery work he's actually done to be at step 3 after this long, but I think at some level he may be aware that the progression isn't happening, and he's squirming a little bit about where does the responsibility lie for that. And I think at some level he may know that he's not doing the work that he needs to do to get this thing healed. And so that may be where the blaming is coming from. Usually we see it early on as well, although it can happen anywhere, as I said. So bottom line, I think, yeah, he needs to really take responsibility. And I'm not sure if that happens, if he has a sponsor, if he has somebody he works with that can really help him. We were just talking about breaking through denial. This is a case where he needs to break through his denial because I think at some point, and I've seen this before in recovery, people go so far, they take ownership of certain aspects, and then they kind of stop. Their recovery gets kind of bogged down, and they never really move forward. They never do really intensive step work. They just, all the edges are kind of a blur, and that really keeps them locked into a mediocre recovery at best. And so I think he needs to really kind of take ownership of what's going on and do his part. And, it may be that you have to put down some boundaries. What's going to work for you? And remember, boundaries are to protect us. And so, maybe that you need to see more. You need to see him show up in different ways or in more meaningful ways to work on the relationship. And that's totally, you're right. And I think that's kind of right with what's needed, frankly, in this situation from what we've read. But yeah, I think just it's not right. It's a big red flag. And I don't know, you don't mention, I think, if he's in therapy or not. Hopefully he has some people that to whom he can be accountable, that can kind of get in his face a little bit, which is kind of what he needs probably at this moment to sort of help him understand the full extent of his responsibility in healing this relationship and his own recovery.
Yeah. Okay, next one here. My mom about a month ago was verbally abusive over text, and without warning, she kind of went off on me because I didn't force my kids to say hi to her over FaceTime. They are 5 and 7, and then proceeded to tell me what a bad mom I am and how I am raising them to be mean and disrespectful. I asked her not to speak to me this way and have since told her I plan to spend Christmas at home, which she guilt-tripped me for. She has been trying to call and move on, but I don't feel it's safe to re-engage without a conversation, which she doesn't ever take accountability for her actions. Where does the relationship go from here? How can I be authentic but not give her a pass? Great question.
And these are exactly the kind of family dynamics that intrude upon our holiday bliss. And this is reality. And so, good for you for being aware of the situation, for going through this. I think, when we have relatives or anybody really that kind of guilt trips us like that and imposes judgment and isn't particularly constructive about how they do it, I think, again, we're just talking about boundaries. I think maybe this is a time for good boundaries and just saying, until we can talk about this or have some closure, I'm not really ready to get too close or to be too vulnerable or to have my young kids around you to any great extent. And I think that, all we can do in a situation like this is kind of take care of our side of the street. And in that case, we have to live with integrity. We have to, be as honest as we can with ourselves and with other people, and in some cases set boundaries. And I think oftentimes that feels weird. It feels hurtful. It feels punishing. And a lot of that, I think, is just our own guilt and probably not being very good at taking care of ourselves sometimes. We had a case early on tonight about more overt abuse, but I think this has flavors of kind of abusive behavior a little bit, in terms of just the judgments about child rearing and all that, and just it just feels icky, and frankly, emotionally. And so I think I would just try to keep it clean, and to protect you and everybody, I would just really set some firm limits on interaction. And it may be that you don't have much interaction right now until we can figure out a way that you guys can talk, or she's willing to talk. But I think boundaries are probably the solution in this situation.
David, can you talk for a second about the sort of the stem sentence that we use to start with the boundary setting?
Yeah, so it's a nice little phrase we use. Basically, when you do or say or whatever, when you do something XYZ, I feel ABC. So when you judge me and speak about how I'm raising my kids, and in this kind of harsh tone, in ways that I think is unfair, I feel hurt, I feel fearful, I feel disappointed, I feel angry, whatever you're feeling. But I think the beauty of that little easy stem sentence, when you do X, I feel Y, it's sort of a non-judgmental thing. It's a statement of fact. And it's a way of observing what somebody's doing and how it's making you feel. And there's not really much to argue about with that. It's your feelings are your right. They're what you're feeling, and the behavior of someone else is what you're observing. So I think that's just a nice way to keep it simple without getting into he said, she said, and blaming and all that stuff. It's just it takes all that off the table. Just is the statement of fact. When you do this, it makes me feel a certain way, and just explaining that. And sometimes, by the way, that simplistic approach can really be useful in just kind of breaking through all the BS and helping people kind of understand, and they may respond in kind with some more clarity and integrity, if you will.
Or they may get extremely defensive,
Wow.
which happens. But at least you're clear about, this is what happened, this is how I felt, and here's how I'm going to respond in this situation and in the future when this happens again. So at least they know what the boundary is. If they choose to cross it, they're going to cross it, but they know there will be consequences. Like, if you treat me like this, I'm not going to come to your house for holidays. I mean, basically. How do you manage expectations while still maintaining boundaries and not being a doormat? How do you recognize too rigid of expectations?
Good questions. So we were speaking of managing expectations in terms of the holidays, what we expect them to be like, and how we can kind of keep ourselves safe and happy and really engaged without overwhelming ourselves. These expectations, I think, are driven by our own boundaries, our own sense of self, as you kind of point out here. The expectations, I'm not sure how they're exactly related to the idea of being a doormat. I think just that really, whatever we bring to the table, right? If our core beliefs are, I'm unworthy, or my opinions don't count, and that results sometimes in behaviors that make us want to kind of please people or appease people or put our own needs aside in favor of somebody else's. All that stuff is old patterns that we really need to be aware of anyway, and do our best to kind of keep out of the interactions. So it sounds like you're already aware of some of those patterns. I would really be highly alert to those, because in an emotionally charged situation like the holidays, and even if we're going through casual, this is all great, there's stress in the air on the holidays. I'd be cautious about it, and just boundaries. If your expectations are for a pleasant interaction with people, you may decide that, well, if somebody crosses the line doing this or that, then I have to disengage from the situation. So those kind of ways we can use as tools that also help us kind of manage the expectation of the situation. The rigidity is another factor. I think sometimes we have to be realistic about our expectations. And I think I've been in situations in the past during the holidays where I realized my expectation would never be met in reality at this particular situation. So I just decided not to engage there. I didn't go. And so it may be that if your intuition tells you that, yeah, this is my expectations of what I would like to see or what I want it to be, but it ain't going to happen, then maybe you have to decide what you're going to do there. But I think just, just by the nature of your question, you have a lot of insight and awareness about potential pitfalls. And I would just be super alert and aware of those and just, be realistic. What I have found, because I've gotten better over the years, but for a long time, and I think this is true of a lot of addicts, I didn't know exactly what I needed. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know anything because I was so used to kind of feeding off other people's needs and ignoring my own. And so I really needed help discussing them with people. So these are not necessarily things you need to come up with on your own in terms of expectations and boundaries and a plan. I would really process that with your support network. Run things by, is this, I have this expectation, is this realistic? Or am I just setting myself up to be disappointed? And I think people can give really great feedback sometimes because also they're objective. They're not necessarily caught up in the emotional entanglements of our own family lives, right? So I think I would check it out, create some, and then talk about it. And I think, two minds are always better than one in a situation like this, and it really is helpful to process it and talk it through.
Yeah. This next question here. Can you speak about the importance of finding a faith-based recovery treatment center for a sex addict that has co-occurring addictions, which I know a little about this situation. I believe it's substance abuse and sex addiction. There was an intervention by the family. The family wanted the individual to come to Seeking Integrity. The addict wants to go to a faith-based treatment center. Can you speak on the difference between a faith-based center and a non-faith-based center? And when we're throwing co-occurring addictions in there, I don't want to lose that little bit because it's important.
Okay. Yeah, so we're fortunate in this country to have a number of different kinds of treatment centers, including some really good faith-based ones and ones that are not necessarily faith-based. I think when it comes to sex and porn addiction, there's many issues, shame, there's many issues of religion that get all tied up in there with judgment, and people carry a whole lot of baggage sometimes. And I have seen situations where clients found it really helpful to be in a place of like-minded people that have that same in-faith experience and have worked their own recovery within the confines of that faith. And oftentimes, by the way, it's not just to work through kind of the horror of it, but it's to work through wanting to re-engage with their faith. They missed their faith. They felt they were kind of abandoned by their faith in many ways. And so I've seen really great work happen at faith-based treatment centers. That said, I think the work of addiction recovery can be also very effective at a place like Seeking Integrity, where we incorporate faith notions. We have someone who's has a master's of divinity on staff, and we don't, shove it down people's throats by any means, but the resources are there and available, because I think everybody will tell you that the aspect of spirituality is really important in recovery, and somehow finding peace with that is important in recovery. So I think we have to really figure out a way to incorporate that. So I don't think you're missing anything by coming to a non-faith-based program. I do think sometimes if there's very special aspects of, for example, religious abuse, which we've seen a lot of, that might be best treated in a place that has experience with that. But I think there's shades of gray here that sometimes it just comes down to the best fit personality-wise and staff-wise. But I don't know what else to say about the faith-based piece. They both have benefits. The co-occurring piece is also equally important. Co-occurring, of course, means using simultaneously different addictive substances or behaviors, for example, drugs and sex. And so I think also sometimes it's useful when these addictive behaviors get really complicated to be in a place that I won't say more open-minded, but I think maybe perhaps less judgmental about some of those things sometimes. With just what we don't want to do ever in treatment is do harm, right? And cause more shame or more hurt for people. And I think so whatever we can do to avoid that, we do, obviously. But I think sometimes it's best to be in a place that is more kind of neutral in terms of the value judgments and the morality of these issues, because that can also just become a big impediment to recovery if people trip over those moral things. And we don't ever impose that. So
Yeah.
we kind of wandered around on that one, Scott, but any other thoughts?
Yes, David is being very modest. Co-occurring addictions, particularly substance abuse meshing with sex addiction, is a very specialized thing. Both halves of the addiction have to be treated at the same time. And you need somebody who knows how to do that. And not a lot of people do. Now, the modesty part, David is the world's leading expert on this particular topic, on co-occurring substance sex addiction. He's written the only book on it and is currently working on the second book on it. There are some, people telling their stories, but as far as a clinical book or an informational book, it's the only one. I don't know of any faith-based centers that deal with co-occurring substance sex addiction. Do you, David?
I don't actually.
I mean, I know of a very good faith sex addiction, but I do not believe they do the co-occurring. And what happens when only half of the addiction is dealt with is the other half will drag the addict back out. And you can speak to that better, David, and you were going to jump in with something else anyway.
Yeah, I was just going to say the dealing with the co-occurring sex and drug addiction, the problem with that is there are two different strategies. But by the time somebody comes to us, they need to really look at a model of abstinence for drug use, right? It's just, I give it up. I don't have to use alcohol again or meth or cocaine or opioids or whatever.
Or the follow-up here is alcohol, shopping, eating, and exercising. So garbage can. So, but mostly alcohol, it says.
But that's an abstinence model. The other half of this addiction is sex. We need to reintegrate sex back into our lives. We don't want to abstain from sex. And those are two very different strategies that you have to work with simultaneously. And that's where the expertise is required, I think. A lot of people don't necessarily get that. And frankly, when a treatment center doesn't understand that, they'll default to one or the other. If they treat sex addiction, they'll treat that and ignore the drug problem. And most of the drug treatment centers in the United States treat drug problem and ignore the rampant sex and porn addiction in their populations because they don't know what to do with it. So yeah, it's a specialized problem.
Yeah. So that what I wasn't trying to give a sales pitch there, but co-occurring addictions require co-occurring treatment. Otherwise, it's going to be ineffective, and the addict will be back at it soon enough. So we have some questions left. I'm going to save them for next week. I copied them and popped them in a document, and we'll address those first next week because we're out of time today. David, welcome back. I'm glad you're feeling better. And thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody. One more question to add for next week. Thank you, everybody, for being here, asking great questions. We'll see you next week. And to my knowledge, we're not taking any weeks off here in December because we land on the 28th.
Yeah, I haven't looked that far ahead yet, but I didn't plan on it.
Okay.
We're straight through.
Okay, excellent. So we'll see you next week and the following week and the week after, and et cetera, et cetera. So good night, everybody.
Everybody, be well. Bye. Take care, Scott.